To my understanding, there was a total of 29 bodies, or 28 bodies.
Do we have your permission to broadcast this interview in radio and television?
As long as you promise I get executed.
I'm not going to say the death penalty is wrong because I'm not in a position to judge it.
I'm ready to get out of here. This place is horrible. It's hard to put in words.
So I got to ask you, how are you feeling this morning? It being flawed and tainted and planted. So is Florida basically killing an innocent man?
Yes. What about the religious aspect of it, Ed?
Well, like I told you before, that's kind of personal.
The day after the shootout, when I woke up in the hospital, I knew.
Okay.
I'm ready to get out of this place. And I can't get anything better but a license.
And I pretty much accepted it then. I'd screwed up and I knew what was going to happen.
Anything happened, I can guarantee I'd do it again, and sooner or later I would kill another child. No, I would do it again. I've been molesting kids nonstop since I was 13 years old.
How tough was it to go to the parole board 2 weeks ago? You looked scared to me.
It was hard.
I remember pulling in the driveway and seeing 2 cars there.
What do you want to say to the family and friends of the victim of Wenda here? What's your message to them?
Billy Wayne Coble, a Vietnam vet and an electrician by profession, Billy Wayne Coble had married Karen Visha in the summer of 1988. Both had been head over heels in love, and Billy had had great expectations from his third marriage. But his optimism took a dive, and he was soon having marital problems and separated from his wife, not long before the slayings.
Do you regret what you did that day? Do you understand and feel the horror?
I accepted I did the murders, yes. I accepted that I'm here for those.
Do you feel bad about what you did?
Well, I feel bad about
the murder of Bobby and his parents.
Yes, I feel bad that feel bad about killing the first person I killed in Vietnam. I see them just as vividly, just as clear.
Coble had kidnapped Karen Visha at knife point. He had attempted to convince her not to divorce him, but eventually had released her unharmed. Several weeks later, Coble was seen driving around the area where Karen Visha and her parents had lived. Drunk on power, Coble had driven around the small town of Axtell in central Texas in search of his estranged wife Karen, who had threatened to divorce him. Whilst he couldn't find Karen, he did find her mother Zelda Walling Visha, father Robert Joseph Visha, and brother John Robert Visha. Reports filed after his arrest detail how he shot them in their home. Coble later found Karen and kidnapped her at gunpoint after handcuffing her 3 children and their cousin to a bed.
Death. Who is not going to leave this world? Aren't we all?
Did you love your wife, Karen?
We all have emotions, and there's many different as I did the day that it happened, but I can never go back and change that.
Away with Karen in a car, but was pursued by the police, who arrested him when his car crashed. Despite sustaining knife wounds from where Coble had attacked her with a knife, Karen had survived. Whilst Coble was in hospital receiving treatment for car crash injuries, he is believed to have told various members of hospital staff that he had taken the lives of 3 people. Since his capture and arrest in 1990, Coble remained in prison and was put on the ending row in the same year. However, in 2007, the gallows sentence against him was overturned, and he was awarded a new trial. At the retrial a year later in 2008, the jury again sentenced him to the gallows. Coble spent nearly 30 years on the infamous ending row of his run from fate after the August 1989 shootings. Finally meeting with his maker on February 28, he became the oldest inmate executed by Texas since the state resumed carrying out capital punishment in 1982. Carol Cole. Carol Cole was born in Sioux City, Iowa. While his father was away fighting the Second World War, his mother had several affairs and sometimes took Cole along to her rendezvous, threatening to beat him if he told his father. Vesta was emotionally hurtful to Cole and dressed him as a girl. At school, he was teased about his girl's name by his peers. Apparently, his crime spree began at the tender age of 8, when he retaliated against one of his classmates, Dwayne, by drowning him in a lake in Richmond, California. The passing was regarded as an accident by authorities, up until Cole confessed it many years later in an autobiography he wrote in prison. According to him, he was primed. He had made the mental commitment he was going to get even with his mother, which became his obsession. Cole spent time in various mental hospitals over the next 3 years, where his pretty graphic, violent fantasies were recorded by his psychiatrist, and he was eventually diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. He eventually married, but that ended prematurely when he was arrested for arson. Upon his release from prison, Cole attempted to strangle an 11-year-old girl in Missouri. He was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He made the same attempt against 2 other women and eventually ended up in a mental hospital. It's amazing how much he could get away with in lieu of his mental illness. Cole's first victim as an adult was Essie L. Buckley, whom he had picked up in a San Diego tavern on May 7, 1971. With her, his fantasies took a dark turn and turned into a reality. Cole descended into the depths of hell, taking the lives of a number of innocents with him. Even the people who were closest to him in his life were not spared. In July 1973, Cole married barmaid Diana Faye Younglove Paschal, who was also an alcoholic. They argued and fought frequently, and Cole regularly went off on his own for days at a time. He would commit slayings while he was away, including one woman he allegedly cannibalized to a degree. In September 1979, Cole strangled Paschal to her demise, but he was cleared of all charges in her passing, which was deemed natural. His crimes eventually caught up with him, and he had to face the piper. On April 9, 1981, Cole was convicted of 3 of the slayings committed in Texas. He was sentenced to life at the Huntsville prison. In 1984, Cole's mother passed away and his attitude was reported to have changed. In February 1984, Cole was extradited to Nevada, where he was tried and convicted for the strangulation passings of 2 women and was handed down the penalty sentence. Though he had confessed to a total of 35 slayings, he was put down in 1985 for taking the lives of at least 15 women and 1 boy by strangulation between 1947 and 1980. Cole met his end through lethal injection at Nevada State Prison on December 6, 1985.
Why not fight for your life? I just don't care to.
What about the religious aspect of it, Ed?
Like I told you before, that's kind of personal.
It is the question.
For what I did, yes, I think I deserve that. The last couple of days have been real emotionally, not mentally drained, not emotionally drained.
Cole's execution is now less than 8 hours away. From the Nevada prison in Carson City, Mark Fierro.
Scott Dozier. Scott Dozier was born before his eyes as he decidedly took a dark path. By his mid-20s, he was making much of his income from the production and sale of methamphetamine, during the course of which he would alternate between Nevada and Arizona, the 2 states in which he was convicted for the slayings which proceeded. On April 18, 2002, Jeremiah Miller met Dozier at La Concha in a motel on the Las Vegas Strip. Dozier had promised to help Miller buy ephedrine, a key ingredient in the production of methamphetamine. Miller had brought $12,000 in cash for that purpose. Upon Miller's arrival at La Concha, Dozier took his life, dismembered him, and stuffed him into a suitcase and disposed it near an apartment complex in western Las Vegas. The suitcase was discovered by a worker in the following week.
You're going to be dead in 2 days.
Yeah, I am.
Have you processed that?
I mean, as much as I'm thrashing, coughing. So actually, I was going to bring that up with my mother and say, listen, just so you know, I've talked to people. I don't get it at all.
Why do you think the country has turned to lethal injection as opposed to the other methods?
You're murdering somebody, man. It's going to be brutal.
Dozier was arrested on June 25, 2002 in Phoenix, Arizona. During a police investigation, it was revealed that Dozier went on a spending spree after he had allegedly stolen Miller's $12,000, telling his friends that he'd won the cash at a casino. Subsequently, he was also connected to the July 27, 2001 slaying of Jason Griffin Green, whose decomposed remains were found in the desert north of Phoenix. Dozier allegedly shot Green at a trailer in Carefree, Arizona, because Green threatened to expose Dozier's methamphetamine operation.
For that to happen?
I do.
And you're cool with that?
I don't care. I'm not going to get up off that fucking table.
How do you feel about the state using fentanyl to kill you?
I think it's awesome.
The death penalty?
No, I don't, though, actually. However, I think that about it because I think if there's a wrong that needs killing, if that's the answer to it, somebody killed somebody I loved, and I was sure they did it. Like someone raped your sister, the only thing you do is bail that person out of jail.
Dozier received a 22-year sentence in 2005 for Green's demise. After being extradited to Nevada, he stood trial for Miller's slaying. He was convicted in September 2007 and received a penalty sentence on October 3, 2007, which was upheld by the Nevada Supreme Court on January 23, 2012. His execution was delayed by several years due to litigation by pharmaceutical companies against the use of their drugs and the execution of penalty sentences. He remains to be one of the few Roe inmates who had requested the state authorities in his own writing to act on their execution orders. Dozier had been on self-hurt watch for several months. According to his lawyers, his mental state had deteriorated due to deprivation of personal belongings and outside contact. On January 5, 2019, Dozier was found lifeless in his penalty row cell by prison officials, having hanged himself from a bedsheet attached to an air vent in the cell. He was pronounced lifeless at 16:35. Dozier was 48 years old at the time of his passing. Wesley Allen Dodd. Wesley Allen Dodd was born in Toppenish, Washington on July 3, 1961, and had a pretty normal childhood. Dodd had initially claimed that he did not experience any hurt, even though he and his brother both had their names recorded in history as criminals who preferred to commit crimes against the young. But he later described his childhood as a traumatic one in which he experienced physical and verbal hurt from his father. Their parents' marriage was anything but stable, and it culminated in his father attempting self-hurt following an argument with his wife on July 3, 1976, Dodd's 15th birthday. At the age of 13, Dodd began exposing himself to children in his neighborhood, which was brushed off as the boys will be boys mentality by his father. He progressed from indecent exposure to child hurt, a trend which continued well into his naval career when he was deployed on base. In 1987, Dodd tried to lure a young boy into a vacant building, but the boy refused to go with him and instead told the police. Prosecutors were aware of Dodd's history of offenses and recommended 5 years in prison.
Times I think about what I've done. I think about some of the things the boys said before they died, and that's real hard to think. Anything happened, I can guarantee I'd do it again, and sooner or later I would kill another child.
Why do you want to be executed?
I have to be.
He was placed on probation and ordered to seek psychiatric treatment. After finishing probation, he stopped going to treatment and moved to Vancouver, Washington. Dodd's fantasies became increasingly violent over the years, and soon he acted on them. He lured two brothers, 11 and 10-year-old Cole and William Neer, to a secluded area where they became his first victims. He went on to repeat the experience with another young boy, and his last attempt to kidnap James Kirk from a local theater on November 13, 1989, became his downfall. He was taken into custody by the police, where he was drilled relentlessly for 3 days, finally confessing to the 3 slayings. During the search of Dodd's home, police discovered a homemade torture rack, along with newspaper clippings about his crimes, a briefcase containing Lee Isley's underwear, a photo album containing picture of Lee, and assorted photographs of children in newspaper and store catalog underwear advertisements. They also discovered Dodd's diary, in which he wrote in detail about the crimes. Dodd was put down at 12:05 a.m. on January 5, 1993, at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. His choice of method of demise had been hanging. Thus came an end to a life which had been useless in any positive way. Rather, it had been a source of pain and fear for children around him.
No, I would do it again. I've been molesting kids nonstop since I was 13 years old. I will kill again. I've done it before, and at the time I liked it.
How do you live with yourself daily?
At times it's not easy. A few child molesters, anyway, are going to think twice before they do anything again.
Earl Forrest. Earl Forrest was convicted of the slaying of Harriet Smith, Michael Wells, and Deputy Sheriff Christopher Parsons. The triple slaying occurred in Dent County, Missouri on February 27, 2002. Earl had a history of criminal activity, including convictions for burglary, stealing, and drug possession. According to court documents, Earl had been involved in a dispute with Harriet Smith, his ex-girlfriend, and Michael Wells, her new boyfriend. Earl had previously threatened the couple, and on the night of the slaying, he showed up at Smith's house with a gun. On that night in December 2002, Forrest, who had been drinking, went to Harriet Smith's home and demanded that she fulfill her part of the bargain to buy a lawnmower and a mobile home for Forrest, in exchange for Forrest introducing her to a source of methamphetamine. During the ensuing melee, Forrest shot a guest of Smith's, Michael Wells, in the face, slaying him. Forrest also shot Smith 6 times, slaying her. He took $25,000 worth of meth from Smith's home and returned to his own home, where he had a shootout with law enforcement officers. He fatally shot Deputy Joanne Barnes. He also shot his girlfriend Angela Gamblin and Sheriff Bob Wofford, both of whom survived. When Deputy Sheriff Parsons arrived at the scene, he was also shot and slain by Earl. After a manhunt, Earl was captured and charged with 3 counts of slaying. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced fatally. The trial revealed that Earl had a long history of criminal behavior and was a known drug dealer. His defense team argued that he had a traumatic childhood, with an offensive father and an absent mother, and that he had struggled with addiction and mental health issues. However, the prosecution argued that his actions were premeditated and that he posed a danger to society.
I remember pulling in the driveway and seeing 2 cars there.
Why'd you sell drugs?
Money is really good.
She knew exactly what I came for.
You know, you're your own boss. And I like working for myself.
She said, "Earl, I'll get you a lawnmower."
Maybe taking someone's life wasn't worth this object?
I thought she rolled her eyes like,
Come out here after the 4th trip to prison in California.
"Oh yeah, okay, whatever, you know."
Start to lose it when I got drunk, and that time I did.
How did the trouble with you and Toddy start?
Well, one was hers, and
How'd you come to be in Missouri?
He had 4,000 a pound.
the other one was a friend of ours named Mike.
Yeah, but then telling her that I was serious, and you know.
What were you serious about?
All I wanted was a lawnmower.
So she come back. She made, you make a lot of money about getting my shit.
And I think that pissed me off.
Like I said, I stayed mad for a year and a half and was only, I need some more and more,
What message were you trying to send?
Earl's case went through several appeals, but his conviction and sentence were ultimately upheld. He was punished by lethal injection on May 11, 2016 at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. He spent over a decade on the row in Missouri before his punishment. Forrest was the 90th person fatally punished in Missouri since the reinstatement of the capital punishment in 1989. Rodney Reed. Rodney Reed is a Texas man who was convicted of the 1996 slaying of Stacy Stites, a 19-year-old white woman who worked at a grocery store and was sentenced to the row in 1998. However, over the years, Reed has maintained his innocence, and his case has attracted widespread attention from activists and lawmakers who believe he was wrongfully convicted. Reed was born on December 22, 1967, in Bastrop, Texas. He grew up in a large family and had several siblings. Reed attended Bastrop High School, but he dropped out in the 11th grade. He later earned his GED and worked various jobs to support himself. In 1996, Stacy Stites, a white woman who was engaged to a police officer named Jimmy Fennell, was found deceased on the side of a road in Bastrop County, Texas. Stites had been strangled, and her body was partially unclothed. Her fiancé initially became a suspect, but he was later ruled out when DNA evidence was found on Stites' body that matched Reed's DNA.
You feel pity. It's sad that he made the choice that he made.
And I did not want to be incriminated in relation to her death. Here the last couple of days I kind of been thinking about it, but that was the worst mistake I've ever could have made.
Well, if she's up in heaven looking down on us, I think she's probably pleased.
The evidence points directly in that direction. That they do know, the state knows that I'm innocent of this case.
And it has taken years, an extraordinary effort.
I'm really glad that justice was served and that the system really does work.
I feel that the truth is out there.
You told the police you didn't know her.
She's not coming back.
That I'm innocent. Absolutely innocent.
To break through this bias in that community.
Important love that's out there for me. I
Well, the evidence points directly at you.
Try not to think about being executed.
Because
that was created from the state's narrative of this whole situation.
Reed, who was African American, was arrested and charged with Stites' slaying. He maintained his innocence, claiming that he had been in a consensual, intimate relationship with Stites and that Fennell had slain her when he found out about it. However, the jury found Reed guilty and he was sentenced to his demise in 1998. In 2019, Reed's case gained national attention when celebrities such as Rihanna began advocating for his release. In November 2019, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals granted Reed an indefinite stay from his punishment, citing the need to consider new evidence and testimony in the case. Wanda Jean Allen. Wanda Jean Allen was born on August 17, 1959, the second of 8 children. Her mother was an alcoholic. Her father left home after Wanda's last sibling was born, and the family lived in public housing and scraped by on public assistance. At the age of 12, Allen was hit by a truck and knocked unconscious, and at 14 or 15 she was knifed in the left temple. It was found that Allen's intellectual abilities were markedly impaired and that her IQ was 69. Found particularly significant was that the left hemisphere of her brain was dysfunctional, impairing her comprehension, her ability to logically express herself, and her ability to analyze cause and effect relationships. It was also concluded that Allen was more chronically vulnerable than others to becoming disorganized by everyday stresses, and thus more vulnerable to a loss of control under stress.
How tough was it to go to the parole board 2 weeks ago? You looked scared to me.
It was hard. But, the reason, Jean likes for us to be present during these times to interview, remind her of things that she would like to say. And that's all about the brain damage, and the borderline mental retardation that she had.
In our lives to happen so He can break us of ourselves and we be blessings to other people as well. It was more harder for me to see the people that love me go through what I was going through. I think about every day I have a birthday that the victim's daughter should have been here with them today.
By age 17, she had dropped out of high school, which was only the beginning of a dark journey. In 1981, Alan was sharing an apartment with Deidre Pettis, a childhood friend turned girlfriend. On June 28, 1981, they got into an argument and Alan shot and slayed Pettis. In her 1981 confession, Alan stated that she accidentally shot Pettis from roughly 30 feet away. However, a police expert testified that bruises and powder burns on Pettis's body indicated that Alan had pistol whipped her, then shot her at point-blank range. Nevertheless, prosecutors cut a deal with Alan and she received a 4-year sentence. Another 7 years passed before her second and last brush with the law occurred. Alan was living with her girlfriend, Gloria Jean Leathers. The two had met in prison and had a turbulent and violent relationship. On December 2, 1988, Leathers, 29, was shot in front of the village police department in Oklahoma City following a violent catfight breaking out between the two women at their own home. Leathers passed away from the injury 3 days later on December 5, 1988. Leathers' mother had been a witness to the incident and the revolver involved in the shooting was recovered. Alan spent 12 years on the row. Her application for clemency was denied. While in prison, she experienced a spiritual awakening before she was put down by lethal injection by the state of Oklahoma on Thursday, January 11, 2001, at Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister.
And it was like, after then, I can't remember all that happened. It was like I was there physically, but not mentally. What I'm saying is, at the time when I went to trial, they wouldn't allow me and my attorney at the time, Bob Carpenter, and they kept continuously telling the jury this person was timid and meek and never done anything in her life. And this is where I need to be, on where I need to be. Out there, I didn't have the money.
But you were carrying a gun.
I didn't have the gun on me.
Brett Hartman. In November of 2012, Ohio fatally punished a condemned assassin, Brett Hartman, who went to his demise still claiming he was innocent of knifing a woman 138 times, slitting her throat and cutting off her hand. "I'm good, let's roll," Hartman said, with his last words. He then smiled in the direction of his sister and repeatedly gave her, a friend, and his attorney a thumbs up with his left hand. Hartman was given a single dose of pentobarbital, and the warden declared his time of demise as 10:34 a.m. Hartman was the 49th inmate put down since Ohio resumed these kinds of punishments in 1999. Hartman acknowledged that he had relations with Wanda Snipes early on the morning of September 9, 1997, at her Akron apartment. He also says he went back to Snipes' apartment later that day, found her mutilated body, and panicked, trying to clean up the mess before calling 911. But Hartman said he didn't slay her, a claim rejected by numerous courts over the years. Hartman's attorneys long said that crucial evidence from the crime scene and Snipes' body had never been tested, raising questions about Hartman's innocence.
But ask why. Why are they hiding? Why are they lying? So when it comes to hands, they searched everywhere. Up until my trial, no one in the world deserves to lose a relative or anyone. And every single time it's come back proving the person's innocence.
He is the 49th inmate put to death since Ohio resumed executions 13 years ago.
The way that Windows, was taken, the hair, fingerprints, and I've never been to prison before, so I'd have no idea.
Slitting her throat and cutting off her hands.
And yet they take only the watch, and that mysteriously ends up being the one thing that was Windows. Why are they refusing to test DNA?
But has always denied he killed her.
Especially family is a very traumatizing experience.
Hartman admitted he had sex with Snipes the day she died.
Critical pieces of evidence. But, I didn't do it. You know why? Their excuse for why they didn't lift those prints?
The evidence included fingerprints allegedly found on a clock and a mop handle. Hartman also argued that evidence could implicate an alternate suspect. The state opposed those arguments, citing the strength of the evidence and the fact that courts have repeatedly upheld Hartman's conviction and fatal sentence. The state also said Hartman refused to take responsibility and show remorse. Tommy Ziegler. Tommy Ziegler was convicted of slaying his wife, her parents, and a customer at the Winter Garden, Florida furniture store that he owned. Born on January 24, 1940 in Georgia, Ziegler was raised in a deeply religious family, attending the Baptist church regularly. He graduated from high school in 1958 and went on to serve in the Army, where he was trained as a paratrooper. After completing his military service, Ziegler attended college and then began working for his family's furniture business. In 1970, he and his wife, Eunice, bought a furniture store in Winter Garden, Florida. The couple was well known in the community and were seen as successful business owners. However, on December 24, 1975, Ziegler called the police to report that his family had been attacked and that he had been shot. When police arrived at the scene, they found the bodies of Ziegler's wife and her parents, as well as a customer who had been in the store at the time of the attack. Ziegler was the only survivor. Despite his claims of innocence, Ziegler was convicted of the slayings and sentenced to his demise in 1976. His case had been the subject of much controversy over the years, with many people believing that he was wrongfully convicted. One of the key pieces of evidence used against Ziegler was the slaying weapon, a .38 revolver. The gun was found in Ziegler's car, and his fingerprints were found on it. However, Ziegler's defense team argued that he could not have used the gun to commit the slayings because he had been shot in the stomach during the attack and could not have wielded the gun for any accuracy. Another point of contention was the testimony of Ziegler's neighbor, who claimed to have seen a man matching Ziegler's description leaving the scene of the crime around the time of the slayings. However, the neighbor had initially described the man as being much shorter than Ziegler, and some witnesses claimed to have seen Ziegler at the store at the time of the slayings.
They got a conviction. And here I am stuck. My life, the way I was raised and with the life I had, what we had, what we did, what we could have had, what we could have done.
I believe it's appropriate to request the court to...
I didn't do it. Look at the evidence that we present.
To bring in whatever new evidence we also forgot?
And the prosecution hid so many key elements from the defense.
You're 73.
And I feel every day of it. I didn't pay too much attention, and the death penalty is political, very political.
No domestic problems of any kind. No infidelity. No stress.
No.
To authorize release of additional pieces of evidence.
That's not reasonable.
That the jury was not able to hear, and I'm positive.
But to leave this order open-ended for a year?
How long have you been on death row?
46 years.
How could I stop? The guy is innocent.
There's not a day go by that I don't think about her.
All the evidence pointed to Tommy Ziegler.
As far as the death penalty, well, I didn't think about it that much.
He will die on death row one way or the other.
Now, I can tell you straight up it's wrong.
Marriage was good?
Very good.
Now, nearly 47 years after being convicted of the quadruple slaying, Ziegler has finally been permitted to independently conduct new DNA testing on evidence he claims will prove his innocence. Circuit Court Judge Patricia L. Strobridge approved Ziegler's request for DNA testing in October 2022. As soon as her ruling was finalized, more than 100 pieces of previously untested evidence were shipped to a California lab to be tested at Ziegler's own expense. This is the culmination of a long legal process for Ziegler, who made his first DNA testing request in 1994. In 2001, DNA testing on portions of Ziegler's clothing found no trace of the victim's blood. Following those results, Ziegler's lawyers requested access to more evidence and permission to conduct further tests at their own cost in 2003, but their requests were denied. This could be the one thing that saves Ziegler's life. Edward Wayne Edwards. The story of how Edward Wayne Edwards was caught as a prolific serial slayer is one of the most revering ones out there. It all started in Watertown, Wisconsin. Timothy Heck and his girlfriend Kelly Drew were attending a wedding reception on August 9, 1980 at the Concord House, a local venue. The 19-year-old high school sweethearts were looking toward the future. He wanted to be a farmer, she just finished beauty school. They had plans to meet friends after the party, but the couple vanished without a trace. After 48 hours, the Jefferson County Police Department launched a missing persons investigation for the couple. Area police forces joined in the search for Hack and Drew, whose clothing was found a few miles from the Concord House. The situation turned from a missing persons case to something more sinister. Police questioned Concord House employees, including handyman Edward Wayne Edwards, who said he had no information. Weeks after the articles of clothing were found, 2 decomposing bodies were discovered in a wooded area that was later identified as Hack and Drew. No weapon was found at the scene, but the crime appeared to be a knifing. Ligature marks also indicated strangulation. The presence of intimate liquids on Drew's clothing also led to suspicion of a physical exploitation. The crime became known as the Sweetheart Slayings. Despite an extensive police investigation, detectives eventually run out of leads. At the time, John Edwards, Edwards' son, was just 9 years old. He recalled the search parties and helicopters. He also said he remembered that just after the discovery, his father hurriedly moved the family, including his 4 siblings, out of the area. In 2008, Richard Lewell, now retired as a special investigator with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, asked that the nearly 30-year-old Sweetheart Slayings case be reopened. Lewell approached the case with vigor and a hunch. He believed that the odds were strong that police had actually interviewed the slayer and that name would be on file. After 2 months of digging into the files, the name that stood out to him was Edward Wayne Edwards, who fled the area with his family after the slayings. Investigators questioned witnesses about the handyman. They told him that he was short-tempered and volatile, a man who'd beat up his kids and wife and was basically a monster. Lewell also learned that Edward Wayne Edwards, who was born in 1933, was raised in an orphanage and spent time in juvenile detention. More criminal activities followed, including an armed bank robbery in the 1960s in Akron. Arrested in 1962 for the robbery, he spent 5 years behind bars. When he got out, he married and started a family. He claimed he turned his back on crime and wrote a book about it, but it was all a front. His father's pattern of getting jobs, piling up debt, and then fleeing to another area took hold.
Boy lived with some foster parents on the other side of town in Burton.
I deserve it, yes.
With Danny, I saw an opportunity for the insurance purposes and everything.
I'm sorry and everything, but I'm not going to stand up and beat myself on the chest, and certainly I'm.
And so he ended up living with one of the kids that he used to be there. He was not a foster son, he was not an adopted son.
I'm not going to get up in court and apologize and things like this. It's already.
Ended up getting $250,000 out of it, and he got, the people there got divorced.
I believe that would be an insult to injury.
That we had his name changed to Danny Boy Edwards and that, but he took about a year to set it up, and that's what I did. I set it up to collect the money. And
Lewell's team knew they had one surefire way to connect Edward Wayne Edwards to the Sweetheart Slayings: the DNA sample left on Drew's clothes. They eventually tracked him and his wife to a trailer park in Louisville, Kentucky. By that time, he was 74 years old, obese, and relying on oxygen to breathe. He grudgingly agreed to have an oral swab to collect a DNA sample. At a crime lab in Wisconsin, Edward Wayne Edwards' DNA and the genetic material at the crime scene matched. On July 30, 2009, he was arrested and brought to Wisconsin. Edward Wayne Edwards seized control of the situation. He didn't want to spend his life in prison and would have rather had capital punishment. He sent a letter to the Ohio prosecutor's office. In it, according to Brooke Ellen Tuber, Assistant District Attorney, Jefferson County, Wisconsin, Edwards made a provocative statement. He wrote that once officials knew what he had to share, "You're going to want to put a needle in my arm." Edwards confessed to slaying 21-year-old William Billy Lavico and 19-year-old Judith Straub in Park Norton, Ohio. But he hadn't played his last hand yet. Edward Wayne Edwards then confessed to slaying his 23-year-old foster son, Danny Boy Edwards, in 1996 with a shotgun. The motive? Getting the payout of the young man's life insurance worth $250,000. On March 8, 2011, Edward Wayne Edwards was sentenced to his demise for the slaying of Danny Boy Edwards, finally getting his wish. Robert Fratta. They say that Robert Fratta was a deviant who was motivated by a messy divorce, a bitter custody battle, and money from an insurance policy. These things drove Robert to pay an 18-year-old triggerman $1,000 to slay Farrah Fratta, the mother of his 3 children, in 1994. Fratta organized the slaying for hire plot in which a middleman, Joseph Pristash, hired the shooter, Howard Guidry.
Not being afraid to die, I think that's more of my relationship with God. I'm ready. Yeah, I don't mind dying at all. She didn't meet the physical attributes of what I was looking for in a wife.
He showed no remorse. He showed only the fact that he was full of himself, that he was cocky, that he could beat this.
You learn to control your emotions.
During the interview that he was not what we'd call freely forthcoming with all his information.
Farrah Fratta was shot twice in the head by Guidry in her home's garage in the Houston suburb of Atascocita. Robert Fratta, who was a public safety officer for Missouri City at that time, had long claimed he was innocent. But justice caught up with him when his guns for hire decided to become witnesses at his trial. Fratta was first sentenced to the gallows in 1996, along with his accomplices, but his conviction was overturned by a federal judge, who ruled that confessions from his co-conspirators shouldn't have been admitted into evidence. He was retried and resentenced to demise in 2009. During a 2009 retrial, the couple's children, who were then young adults, testified against their father, and Fratta was convicted and sentenced to her end once more. After 26 years on the row, a judge finally scheduled his date of demise. The former Missouri City police officer was finally put down, making him the first person in the state of Texas to be done so in 2023.
Bob thought he was smarter than everybody else, and he thought he was smarter than we were.
One thing he didn't count on, though, is that there were phone records.
I pulled the gun up and I shot her once in the head, and she fell to the side.
If he has any compunction towards guilt for killing someone, then they can exonerate themselves by having someone else do the killing. They shouldn't feel guilty. They actually did not murder the person.
Carl Wayne Bunchen. Texas' oldest Enro inmate was punished in April of 2022 for slaying a Houston police officer during a traffic stop more than years ago. Carl Bunchen was born on March 30, 1944. When he was a child, his father slew a man in front of one of his sons and was violent towards his whole family. In one incident, he smashed his wife's teeth. Bunchen sustained broken bones from the harm, and he said he had post-traumatic stress disorder because of it. One of his brothers served a 20-year sentence for an unrelated crime. Bunchen had a lengthy criminal history prior to the slaying, starting with a theft conviction in 1961. Over the years, he gathered convictions for burglary, damage to property, and possession of narcotic drugs. At the time of the shooting, Bunchen had been on parole after serving 13 months of a 15-year sentence for physically exploiting a child. On April 10, 1971, his twin brother, Kenneth Bunchen, was slain by two police officers during a shootout. At the time, Bunchen had supposedly vowed to avenge his brother's demise. In addition, he had allegedly told a companion that he would rather shoot it out with police than be sent back to prison. On June 27, 1990, Bunchen was the passenger in a vehicle that was pulled over by 37-year-old Houston Police Department officer James Irby. Irby began speaking with the driver, and Bunchen exited the vehicle and shot Irby once in the head. Irby fell to the ground, and Bunchen shot Irby twice in the back. Bunchen fled the scene, shooting at others who were nearby. After slaying Irby, Bunchen also attempted to shoot at a driver during a carjacking attempt, fired at another officer, and held another person at gunpoint before he was arrested. Bunchen was apprehended in a nearby building. In 1991, a jury found Bunchen guilty of capital slaying, and he was sentenced to his demise on January 24, 1991. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals vacated Bunchen's sentence in 2009. Bunchen went to trial again in 2012. At the trial, his brother testified about their childhood. On March 6, 2012, Bunchen was again sentenced fatally by a jury. On March 30, 2022, Bunchen's lawyers asked the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles to commute Bunchen's sentence to a lesser sentence or to give him a 90-day reprieve. They argued that Bunchen's sentence should be commuted because it was imposed by a jury that wrongly predicted he would pose a future danger to fellow inmates. They also stated that Bunchen's physical impairments, including sciatic nerve pain that sometimes required him to use a wheelchair, would prevent him from harming anyone should he be released. Additionally, the lawyers asked for a 90-day reprieve to determine if Bunchen would have access to his spiritual advisor during the punishment based on the previous Supreme Court decision in Ramirez v. Collier. On April 19, 2022, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles rejected Bunchen's request for commutation or clemency, voting unanimously against Bunchen. 1 week prior to Bunchen's scheduled punishment, he contracted pneumonia, which makes lethal injection more painful. On his return from the hospital, where he received treatment for pneumonia, Bunchen received a head injury when the vehicle he was being transported in came to a sudden stop. In an interview shortly before his punishment, Bunchen expressed remorse, saying, "Every day for the last 32 years I have regretted what happened." As is customary, he was given a $20 budget for a special meal the night before being punished. The elderly triple slayer chose a double bacon cheeseburger, a deep dish apple pie, and vanilla bean ice cream.
How often do you think about that day?
I think about it every day.
I can only say
but it was an amazing feeling.
A lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered.
Every day for the last 32 years, I've regretted what happened. When you're sorry that something happened, is that the right word? Remorse? I think the answer is yes.
Thank God after 32 years.
And stood over my husband's lifeless body and shot him twice more in the back.
I wished it hadn't have happened.
Some sense of closure and moving forward.
He thanked his friends. He addressed the Irby family.
Because he was fixing to kill me.
I was with him up to about 15, 20 minutes before his death.
Deepest breath I've been able to in the last 32 years.
Carl Bunchen was executed tonight for the 1990 murder.
Is that called remorse?
Why did you shoot Officer Irby?
The only thing Jim ever said to the guy was he told him to get back in the car.
Of Houston police officer James Irby.
When I pulled my gun, it was in self-defense.
And he expressed remorse for those actions. Bunchen did make a last statement acknowledging that he was the killer of their father and of her husband.
In his last moments, when he was being strapped to the gurney, he said, "I wanted the Irby family to know one thing. I do have remorse for what I did. I pray to God that they get the closure for my slaying their father and Mrs. Irby's husband. I hope to see you in heaven someday, and when you show up, I will give you a big hug." Bunchen, joined by his spiritual advisor, began praying Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd," as the lethal dose of the powerful sedative pentobarbital began. He took a deep breath, coughed once, then took 3 less pronounced breaths before all movement stopped. He was pronounced deceased at 6:39 p.m., 13 minutes later. Several dozen motorcyclists, including motorcycle officers from the Houston Police Department and retired officers from motorcycle clubs, gathered outside the Huntsville unit and revved their engines at the time of the punishment. Those attending the punishment stated they could hear the noise, with some calling it disrespectful and disgusting. James Barnes. Born on April 27, 1944 in Detroit, Michigan, he was regularly mistreated by his alcoholic parents, with Barnes claiming that his mother had attempted to miscarry by ingesting a quantity of drugs. In another instance, he had been put in a sack and lowered into a well as punishment for misbehaving. He started exhibiting signs of mental illness early in his life and had to be treated in various institutions around Michigan, Tennessee, and Missouri for depression, hallucinations, and drug use. In between these treatments, Barnes committed a variety of petty crimes, with his most notable conviction being for a bank robbery committed in Detroit. After being released from prison, Barnes found employment as a factory worker for a General Motors plant, but was laid off after company sales went down. Left without a home or any close living relatives, he decided to move to Memphis, Tennessee, setting in the Nightwoods neighborhood of Parkway Village. From August to November 1988, Barnes would attack at least 5 prostitutes, 3 women and 2 male transvestites, around various neighborhoods in Memphis. 3 of these resulted in fatalities. The last confirmed attack occurred on November 5, when Barnes picked up 30-year-old Eric Lewis from 4th and Vance Avenue.
It's just, there's different personalities.
Yeah, and for you?
For me, I appreciate it.
You have observed that?
I have observed that. You know, in December, I've been locked up for 13 years.
Well, it was for a previous conviction.
Correct.
On murder charges.
Correct.
Yeah.
He then drove to the rear of 674 South Main, where he shot him with his pistol. Like Thompson before him, Lewis's injuries proved non-fatal, and he survived the attack. Following the slaying of Thomas, the Memphis Police Department formed a special task force to investigate the recent slayings, which predominantly focused on interviewing various people for potential incriminating information. A major break came right after the attack on Lewis, when a witness claimed that they had marked down the license plate of the car that had picked up Lewis. When examined, it was revealed to be a gray Hyundai belonging to Barnes that matched the description of the supposed offender's car, seen in some of the other attacks. Several officers were then tasked with keeping watch of Barnes, and on November 10, he was arrested after a short car chase. The arresting officers saw him throw out a pistol during the chase, and when ballistic tests were performed on it, it was established that it was the same .32 pistol used in all 5 attacks. They finally had him, and all that was left were the court proceedings before this criminal got his just desserts. Simple, right? Not so fast. What stood between James Barnes and destiny was an ocean of psychiatric evaluations, which concluded that Barnes did indeed suffer from mental disease, claiming that the psychiatrist had identified 12 distinct personalities with separate body language, mannerisms, and facial expressions. Barnes was detained in various mental health institutions until 1996, when it was finally ruled that even though he was indeed mentally ill, he understood the nature of his crimes and was thus eligible to stand trial. With his trial scheduled for September 1997, Barnes unexpectedly made guilty pleas on all 3 counts. As part of a plea deal with prosecutors, the penalty sentence was dropped and the charges were reduced to second degree. Instead, he was sentenced to 40 years imprisonment with a chance of parole after serving 16 years. Barnes was then transferred to the Lois M. DeBerry Special Needs Facility in Nashville, where he would remain under treatment until he served out his sentence.
And basically,
What is a sleeper hold?
Where he took her neck and put it in the crook of his arm, and actually what ends up happening is he chokes her to death, he strangles her to death.
Jamie Lurch McCoskey. Apparently everything is big in Texas, including their slayers. Jamie Lurch McCoskey is one such example. He left a deep imprint on the world, but not in a good way, and this is the story of his crimes. At approximately 6 or 6:30 p.m. on November 13, 1991, an engaged couple returned to their apartment complex from a brief shopping trip. They went upstairs to their apartment, and the eventual victim unlocked the door, leaving the keys in the lock until they could get the groceries inside. As he turned to remove the keys from the door, he encountered Jamie McCoskey standing in the doorway. McCoskey unzipped his jacket to reveal a hunting knife in a scabbard in the waist of his pants. When asked what he wanted, McCoskey responded that he wanted a ride and they were going to take him where he needed to go. The victim agreed to take McCoskey where he wanted to go, on the condition that his fiancée be allowed to stay behind, but McCoskey insisted that she come along. McCoskey instructed the man to go to a gas station and put gas in the car, which he did. 2 or 3 blocks away from the station, McCoskey decided that he wanted to ride up front in the passenger seat so he could get out quickly in case a police officer pulled them over. After McCoskey and the woman changed positions, McCoskey instructed the driver to get onto the highway I-10 eastbound. While they were on the highway, McCoskey apparently made several contradictory statements, including 1. He was going to slay the couple, 2. He just needed a ride and he knew no one would volunteer, 3. He knew how to slay people using martial arts techniques, and 4. He was doing this for someone else who wanted him to steal the car. He was obviously playing games with them for his own amusement. Eventually, McCoskey instructed the driver to exit I-10 and directed him, somewhat indirectly, to an embankment in the middle of an empty field. Apparently, McCoskey was looking for an isolated place. After the car was stopped, McCoskey took the keys and proceeded to a Suburban parked nearby to tell its occupants that the land was private property and they needed to leave. After a brief conversation with McCoskey, the occupants of the Suburban left. McCoskey returned, kind of jumpy, grabbed the victim around the neck, pulled him down, and put a knife to his throat. McCoskey then ordered the woman to handcuff the decedent's hands behind him. He then got into the driver's seat and figured out how to drive the car. As McCoskey drove in the direction of the couple's apartment, the victim attempted to tell him that the woman was pregnant and asked him not to hurt her. McCoskey's response was that he better shut up and not make him mad. McCoskey then told them that he was going to leave the victim with some friends and then drop the woman off at the apartment, and after leaving the apartment he would call his friends to release the man. This way, he could ensure that the two would be too scared to call the police. However, as they neared the apartments, McCoskey turned away and eventually came to an empty house close to the freeway. McCoskey took the woman into the house at knife point, proceeding to attack her. He then returned her to the car and took the man into the house. The next sound the woman heard was something which made the hair on her body stand on end. The woman then jumped from the car and fled across a gravel road and through a field to a nearby home. The occupant of the house would not allow her to enter, but then McCoskey appeared with a knife in hand, shaking his head. The occupant let the woman in and locked the door, whereupon she then called 911 while McCoskey fled in the couple's vehicle. When the police arrived on the scene, they found the man's body inside the empty house. The police eventually located McCoskey and arrested him. Upon his arrest, they noticed knife scabbards strapped to both his belt and his right leg. The knife used in the knifing was located a few feet away from him on the floor. Apparently, this hasn't been McCoskey's first rodeo. His first brush with the law came in his youth in 1981, when he was committed to juvenile custody of the Texas Youth Council for an unnamed but apparently serious offense. That had only been the beginning of a long and illustrious career as a violent criminal. It was followed closely by a 1983 conviction for kidnapping, for which McCoskey received shock probation. The probation was revoked later that year after McCoskey committed an attack. While in the penitentiary, McCoskey committed several rules violations. including 5 fights and 4 incidents of striking or threatening an officer. 1987 convictions for misdemeanor attack and possession of marijuana, as well as a 1992 incident of striking another inmate in the Harris County Jail with a chisel, cracking his skull. What followed were multiple incidents of violence with McCoskey right in the middle of it all. Unfortunately for his last victim, his criminal career ended with his demise, with the long arm of the law catching up to him a bit too late.
The so-called victim in my case wanted us to go out there so he can retrieve the money that he took from a girl that was living with. Now that I've got a date, I don't have a problem disclosing that. During the day, I put my money, well, I get off like at 2 at night. During the night, I put my money inside of a...
So the victim wanted to go to Beaumont?
Yeah. See, I was running haunted houses. She went to the same guy that I bought dope from, weed. And I always told her to stay a couple blocks Chester drawer, and the girl that was living with me took the money and tried to double it up down the street. Don't follow me. Well, she found out who I was, and she went up there the day that I was at work. He jacked her. You know what that is, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Right. Said, I want to buy this acid.
As a result of his fatal actions, almost 22 years to the day of his last crime, Jamie met his maker when he was neutralized by the authorities at Walker County, Texas. A jury found McCoskey guilty of capital slaying in November 1992 and sentenced him to the gallows.
I told him, this girl is my woman. You took that money and I want that money back. So I came over there. He didn't know me at the time. Met him out in the parking lot because he just got back from a grocery store. He gave me the baloney that he didn't have the money, but he knew a guy that had money that owed him. You know, if the inmates are going to listen to it, they don't want to listen to people that are in favor of killing them. You have 2 attorneys that are for the death penalty, regardless what they tell you, or or the civilians that are against the death penalty. I'm not like they are. I speak what's on my mind. I don't try to sugarcoat something. You're going to come out and admit it, do some research, regardless if they're in the favor of it. Like I've told you, I'm not against the death penalty.
The day after his conviction, after entering the courtroom, McCoskey picked up a heavy oak chair and threw it at the prosecutors. The chair flew 10 feet, hitting one prosecutor on the arm and grazing another before crashing into the jury box rail. "That's for lying in court," he shouted at the prosecutors.
Do we have your permission to broadcast this interview on radio and television?
As long as you promise I get executed, I'm ready to get out. This place is horrible. It's hard to put in words.
Okay.
I'm ready to get out of this place. And I can't get anything better but a license.
John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, the second child. Gacy was close to his mother and 2 sisters, but endured a difficult relationship with his father, an alcoholic who was physically hurtful to his family. One of Gacy's earliest memories was of his father beating him with a leather belt for accidentally disarranging components of a car engine he had assembled. His mother tried to shield her son from his father's acts, but to no avail. Despite this mistreatment, however, Gacy still loved his father, but felt he was never good enough in his father's eyes. By 1949, Gacy was able to come into his own and build a life for himself with the new addition to his life, Marilyn. After a 6-month courtship, Gacy and Myers married in September 1964. Marilyn's father subsequently purchased 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The happy couple moved into their new home, where he opened a club in his basement, where his employees could drink alcohol and play pool. These premises later became the site of many incidents of hurtful acts.
Way in the back of the house, in the rec room, on the telephone. When they finally walked around the side of the house, police station. Okay, well, I didn't have time because I was doing work for the county and stuff like that. I started doing painting, and then I started doing wallpapering and decorating. And inside of 3 years, 1974 became a corporation. And then I owned PDM Contractors Corporation. I owned Statement of the Police Department. And from that date forward, they had me under.
He had formed a strong foundation for himself and felt confident in acting on his latent tendencies, which he had kept hidden up till this point. Soon he was playing out his compulsions on young teenage boys, scamming them into acting on receiving his attention. Soon Gacy came into the notice of law enforcement agencies, and he was brought in for questioning. While charges were brought against him, Gacy employed criminal means to subdue the witnesses, but once again he was caught out in his dastardly designs. His psych evaluation marked him as a sociopath with psychotic tendencies with no hope for rehabilitation. Gacy was convicted and imprisoned for 10 years for the attack on teenager Voorhees. Gacy's wife petitioned for divorce and took the entire property as well as sole custody of their kids. He never saw his family ever again. Thus came the end to Gacy's story of survival and started his descent into crime. It was the beginning of his journey down a dark and evil path. His descent down the rabbit hole began in 1970, when he was released from prison after serving 18 months of his 10-year sentence. By 1971, he was once again behind bars facing charges of attacking a teenage boy yet again. With financial assistance from his mother, Gacy bought a ranch house near the village of Norwich Witch he used as his slaying field. For many months to come, Gacy used his residence to throw opulent parties, entertaining the rich and influential under his roof. He even made an attempt at normality by marrying once again, but it turned out it was only a ruse to throw any suspicion off his scent, and ended in a premature divorce. In their time together, his second wife had observed the comings and goings of young boys and come across their belongings quite frequently. In 1979, Gacy had a flourishing career as he worked for PDM in interior design, remodeling, installation, assembly, and landscaping. Through his membership in the local Moose Club, Gacy became aware of a Jolly Joker clown club in which he joined in late 1975, and created his own clown characters Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown, devising his own makeup and costumes. That's where he birthed his alter egos, who accompanied him on a spree of crime, unlike the world had ever seen before. Gacy was unraveling fast, and the only thing which kept him from landing behind bars was that his victims were men. He had no control over his impulses, and all that mattered was that he got the satisfaction of acting on his sick fantasies, no matter what. By the time his criminal career was brought to an end, he had snuffed out 33 souls.
And that same day, they held me there for 9 hours, and while holding me there for 9 hours, they surveillance. The only trouble is that the Mickey Mouse way they were doing it, they had 2 cars following me day and night. To my understanding, there was a total of 29 bodies, or 28 bodies, where one was under the garage. So that makes a total of 29.
Okay. Now, from the standpoint of the arrest, when you did that arrest, do you recall?
December 22nd, 1978 is when I was arrested.
February 6, 1980, charged with 33 slayings. His lawyers opted to have Gacy plead not guilty by reason of insanity to the charges against him. Presenting Gacy as a Jekyll and Hyde character, the defense produced several psychiatric experts who had examined Gacy, but the testimonies against him started piling up, and his accusers started pouring out of the woodwork. John Gacy's long criminal career was about to come to an end, and his criminal tendencies had provided him with the rope to use as a noose against his own neck. At his final hearing, the jury deliberated for a measly 1.5 hours before it passed a guilty verdict, convicting him of the crimes he was facing. At the time of his conviction for 33 slayings, it was the highest count which any person in U.S. history had ever been convicted of. Richard Ramirez. Ricardo Richard Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born on February 28, 1960, was dubbed the Night Stalker, the Valley Intruder, and the Walk-In Slayer, whose crime spree took place in California between June 1984 and August 1985. Ramirez's childhood is considered an influence for his crimes. Frequently hurt by his father, Ramirez began developing gruesome and macabre interests in his early and mid-teens from his older cousin, Miguel Mike Ramirez, who also taught him some of the military skills that he would go on to use during his year-long slaying spree. Ramirez also cultivated a strong interest in Satanism and the occult. By the time he had left his home in Texas and moved to California at the age of 22, he had begun frequently using cocaine, a habit to support which he committed burglaries regularly, taking people's lives in the process. On April 10, 1984, Ramirez took the life of Mei Lung, a 9-year-old Chinese-American girl, in the basement of his apartment building in San Francisco. The slaying was not linked to Ramirez until 2009, when his DNA was matched to a sample obtained at the crime scene. Thus was the beginning of a nightmare playing out in the streets of Los Angeles in the shadows of the nights. By the end of his criminal career, this infamous serial criminal had taken the lives of 18 victims.
Have you studied, just yes or no, have you studied Satanism?
Yes, I have.
Are you a worshiper of the devil?
No comment. They are a product of the times, and these are bloodthirsty times.
What do you want the world to know about you?
The world has been fed many lies about me.
Did you kill 13 people?
It would be improper for me to comment on my LA conviction. I don't care to explain that. Let the quote stand for itself.
Are you appealing these because you say you're innocent? You didn't kill 13 people?
That is correct.
You didn't kill 13 people.
Known to authorities. Interestingly, Ramirez had been leaving a slew of evidence in his wake in the commitment of each crime, which would be later used to connect him to each of his victims. It seemed like he was unbothered by the possibility of getting caught, and in a way, he was actually leaving proof of his presence in the face of law enforcement as a way to mock them in their helplessness. But it seemed that Ramirez's time was up, and the adage that what goes around comes around was about to come true, when he tried to commit another crime to satisfy his beastly urges. This time he chose his own doom when on August 24, 1985, Ramirez traveled 76 miles south of Los Angeles in a stolen orange Toyota to Mission Viejo, to the home of James Romero Jr. Romero's son. 13-year-old James Romero III happened to be awake. He observed Ramirez through his bedroom window, went to wake his parents, and Ramirez fled the scene. James raced outside and noted the color, make, and style of the car, as well as a partial license plate number. Romero contacted the police with this information, believing James had chased away a thief. Erickson gave a detailed description of the assailant to investigators, and police obtained a cast of Ramirez's footprint from the Romero house. The stolen Toyota was found abandoned, from which they recovered his intact fingerprint. The print was positively identified as belonging to Ramirez, courtesy of fingerprint filing which took birth only a month before Ramirez was born. Now the authorities had a face and a name to go with the infamous Night Stalker. On August 29, 1985, law enforcement officials decided to release a mugshot of Ramirez from a 1984 arrest for auto theft to the media. August 30, 1985, Ramirez took a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother, unaware that he had become the lead story. After noticing a group of elderly Hispanic women fearfully identifying him as El Matador, literally the Slayer in Spanish, Ramirez saw his face on the front page of the newspaper La Opinión, with a headline calling him Invasor Nocturno, and fled the store in a panic. The hunter had officially become the hunted, but how he was caught and handed over to the police was legendary.
And on my pending case here in San Francisco.
Why?
Because of my appeal.
But you're right in there now as far as everybody else is concerned.
Serial killers do on a small scale what governments do on a large one. Even psychopaths have emotions if you dig deep enough. But then again, maybe they don't. I'll tell you what, I gave up on love and happiness a long time ago. Again, it would be improper for me to comment in any regard to that question. People in this day and age are brainwashed and programmed like a computer at being nothing more than puppets. The Satanist admits to being evil.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil.
Oscar Ray Bolin. Bolin was born on January 22, 1962 in Portland, Indiana. His family consisted of laborers and carnival workers. He had experienced horrific hurt at the hands of his parents, who used to beat him when he was a child, and his mother once walked him to a school bus on a leash. It wasn't surprising that Bolin grew up frequently getting into trouble with the law during his youth, but the crimes committed in his youth were only a precursor to much darker, devilish pursuits, which eventually led to his conviction. On January 25, 1986, 25-year-old Natalie Blanche Hawley finished work and locked up the store for the night with a colleague. She left the store around 1:30 a.m. and headed to her car. Her body was found hours later by a morning jogger. On November 5, 1986, 17-year-old Stephanie Collins, a Chamberlain High School student, disappeared after finishing her shift at a drugstore. On December 5, 1986, her body was found wrapped in sheets and towels. The same day, 26-year-old Terry Lynn Matthews also went missing. Her body was located later that day in some woods, wrapped in a white sheet. The police knew they had a serial slayer on their hands, and only fate led them to connecting the dots and finding a connection between Bolin and these victims. In 1983, Bolin had married his girlfriend, Cheryl Hafner.
You've been here 28 years.
I've been locked up 28 years, since December 1986. And in confinement.
And explain what that's like.
Imagine spending 28 years in this room. There's no way to describe it. I don't know how you would expect someone to feel. I mean, if they told you tomorrow you're dying, how would you feel? But I'm at peace with myself. I mean, as far as it's my release. We all die, but it's knowing your exact date and time that's hard to deal with.
So I got to ask you, how are you feeling this morning?
A little numb.
In 1987, Bolin and 2 other men committed a crime together. Afterward, Bolin attempted to slay his victim with a gun, but the gun jammed. He let the woman go along a highway in Pennsylvania. Bolin was captured and sentenced to 22 to 75 years in prison. In 1989, Bolin and Cheryl Hafner divorced, with Hafner remarrying soon after. She told her new husband that Bolin had told her about committing multiple slayings. Hafner's new husband then called a tip line and implicated Bolin. More witnesses then came out to testify against him, including his younger half-brother and a cousin. Hafner testified that she had been with Bolin before he kidnapped Holly and had helped him dispose of some evidence. Bolin's half-brother testified that he watched Bolin beat Matthews and attempt to drown her with a garden hose. Bolin's cousin confessed to aiding Bolin in abducting 30-year-old Deborah Diane Stowe outside a convenience store in Greenville, Texas in 1987, who lost her life in the attack. Texas prosecutors declined to seek an indictment in the case because Bolin was already charged with multiple slayings in Florida. Bolin was found guilty and was sentenced to the gallows in July 1991 for the slaying of Holly. He later received another capital punishment sentence for the slaying of Collins and received a third one for the slaying of Matthews. Bolin was put down by lethal injection at 10:16 p.m. Eastern on January 7, 2016. He was the first person to be put down and under in the United States in 2016. His last meal consisted of a ribeye steak, a baked potato, salad, garlic bread, lemon meringue pie, and Coca-Cola, a befitting end to a violent criminal who had been the devil's minion in human form.
So you're saying you didn't murder these women?
No.
You didn't murder Natalie Holly? Stephanie Collins?
My punishment's over. I've been here 28 years now. I'm tired.
Terry Lynn Matthews?
No. I didn't know him. I'd never seen him. Never met him. A lot of support outside. That's made it a little easier. But still, it's very difficult to spend. I had a lot of support. A lot of people loved me and cared about me. 28 years in a room like this.
It being flawed and tainted and planted. So is Florida basically killing an innocent man?
Yes.
Earl Forrest. The incident perpetrated by Earl Forrest was one of the darkest chapters of Dent County's history, and Forrest, in every way, embodies the unleashed demons which still haunt that community. In an interview, Forrest claimed Smith didn't hold up her end of a drug deal and never delivered on her promise. That betrayal, Forrest says, is what led him to get drunk on the morning of December 9, 2002, drive to her home and gun her down in cold blood. That day had been like any other when Earl had arrived at his victim's house. Drunk out of his senses he had been, but not enough to be incapacitated. He had driven to Smith's home in the southern Missouri town of Salem and had demanded that she fulfill her promise to buy a lawnmower and mobile home for him in exchange for introducing her to a source for methamphetamine. Earl's second victim, Wells, had been visiting Smith at the time. An argument ensued and Forrest shot Wells directly in the face. For him, it had been a definite case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. After doing away with Wells, Earl had shot Smith 6 times and had taken a lockbox full of meth valued at $25,000. He had fled to the safety of his own home in a useless attempt to get away with what he had done. The first chance he got, Forrest injected himself with the meth back at his place on Dent County Road 2313. The police had finally triangulated his position and quartered him like a dog in his own home, where a gun battle between Forrest and the law enforcement officers occurred. After shooting up, Forrest slayed Barnes when she arrived on scene with Sheriff Bob Wofford to investigate the 2 slayings. Wofford was shot but not fatally injured in the ensuing gunfire. Forrest was apprehended after being shot twice during the ensuing standoff. According to witnesses, he put some meth in his mouth when he got injured.
He just started walking up and he was behind her, and when I pulled my gun out and he pulled his out and we started shooting at each other. You know, they got out of the car,
crawled to the door and yelled, "I surrender, we need help, people down." Forrest's girlfriend, Angela Gamblin, was also shot in the burst of gunfire, though she and Wofford survived along with Forrest. Apparently, Forrest had been an old hand at his dirty games. He began dealing drugs in high school when he wanted to be the popular renegade. By his early 20s, he graduated to selling speed and meth up and down the West Coast. Many people believe Forrest didn't deserve any more attention than he's already gotten. He was selfish in his substance use and greedy in his dealing. At the height of the meth epidemic, he conspired to import pounds of the drug. Worst of all, he was reckless with violence and willing to slay if it meant protecting his macho image. Forrest lived his life wanting to be called a kingpin and getting respect for his tough attitude to the world. His goal was for others to label him a badass, and he was willing to go to great lengths to uphold that persona. Forrest was a fool, too simple and too stupid to know right from wrong.
She's the one that had arrested me for absconding parole back in '98. You know, I felt she was disrespecting me in the worst way. Yeah, it's not. It wasn't even about a lawnmower. It was about the fact that someone respects you, they'll treat you right. They won't try to pull any nickel and dime bullshit on you. You know, get something from me and thinking, you ain't gonna do nothing. Psychological problem with me, more than one, but you know, I don't feel things.
As a last-ditch attempt to dodge his fate, attorneys for Forrest claimed that their client suffered a brain injury years ago, and that a PET scan conducted after his conviction confirmed it. They had also argued in an earlier appeal that the scan should have been conducted before his conviction and the results made available to the jury. But the Missouri Supreme Court upheld his conviction and penalty sentence in a 2009 ruling.
Thinking I could leave California and get away from the shit when I was convicted of 3 first-degree murders. Time and place, yeah, I guess so. I'm not going to say the death penalty is wrong because I'm not in a position to judge it. The day after the shootout, when I woke up in the hospital, I knew, and I pretty much accepted it then. I'd screwed up and I knew what was going to happen.
Every story has an end, and Earl's end was as violent as his life and what he put his victims through. Forrest was convicted of 3 counts on December 17, 2004, and sentenced to the gallows. Earl Forrest was the 1,436th person put down in the U.S. since 1976, the 87th person sent to demise in Missouri, and the 1,261st person exposed to the lethal injection. He was interviewed to find out whether his years on the row had blunted the brazenness of his tone and if the looming specter of demise had changed his soul. Apparently, his soul was as black to that day as it had been before. That's all we have for you, folks. Join us next time.